Well, the situation in Lebanon seems to be as hot as it was this past fall, when people were out in the streets over the proposed what back then was the WhatsApp tax. A tax, for those of you who don't know, WhatsApp is an app that essentially lets you text and make calls over the internet instead of using it uses data instead of a phone plan, basically. And so through the use of WhatsApp, you can make free international calls and things like that. And in a very small country like Lebanon, where you're likely to have a lot of ties to people outside of Lebanon, having free access to free international calls and texts is very convenient. Of course, Lebanon in particular has a huge diaspora around the world, so a lot of people, a lot of Lebanese people work outside of Lebanon, and so they talk to their family regularly through WhatsApp. But that was the old protest movement. And this new protest movement, because I believe the WhatsApp tax was pulled as soon as that happened, because I might be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure that was pulled. And the new protests don't seem to be that much focused on it anyway. And it very quickly evolved into, protests over something much more than the WhatsApp tax, as, these protest movements typically do. If you remember the Yellow Vest protest movement, which is, pretty similar, that was started over a tax on diesel fuel, I believe. Actually, it might have been on gas and diesel, but whatever. It was the road tax on fuel in France. And that was pulled a long time ago. Macron, I don't believe, is trying to raise the gas tax anymore. But yet we still have the Yellow Vest protesters around, because that was what sparked the movement. And same thing here in Lebanon. Now, what are these people calling for? They want an overthrow of their current government, and they want it to be replaced by something not so great, supposedly impartial technocrats who just have, the country's best interests at heart. That's a fiction. That's a terrible idea. Technocrats are some of the most evil and destructive people on the planet. The people who have good intentions and think that they're saving the world often, make the most disastrous and worst of leaders. Technocrats ruled a lot of the former communist countries, and in a lot of cases that didn't work out so well. And of course, citing my own experiences and my knowledge of American history, a lot of the worst impulses of the American government have come from these professional sort of leaders. It's come from the team of advisors, the learned experts who come up with these great ideas on how the government can help everyone. By an example, during the Great Depression, the Wizards of Smart said, well, what we have to do to help all the starving people in our country is, you see all this food we have here, we have to burn it so that there's less food, so that the price will go up, and so that farmers will grow more food. That was the idea, that by making food more scarce than it already was, and letting people starve, that in the long run, farmers would produce more food, and then everyone would have more to eat. And so in implementing their harebrained scheme, which, by the way, is still in practice today, the government still rounds up lots of food, so-called surplus food, and burns it. Of course, nowadays it's more figurative and not literal, because they take that food and export it to other countries and dump it in Africa and Asia. But, that's beside the point. Back to Lebanon, though. Was I originally talking about that? I seem to have gotten off on a very bad tangent. Lebanon's in a whole heap of trouble right now as far as their financial system goes, and I had to do some digging into this, and it's actually quite interesting. Right now, people are unable to get their money out of the banks in Lebanon, and they're very upset. And at first, I thought that this was, when I heard that there was a liquidity crisis, I was thinking this is a natural run on the banks, and I was thinking, this is great. People are waking up to the fact that fractional reserve banking is not a safe practice, that it's in fact fraud, and that when the bank says they have your money, they actually don't have your money. I was kind of happy at first, saying, oh wow, these folks are standing up, they're realizing that this banking system is corrupt, and they're going to demand 100% reserve banking, I thought. And I don't think that people necessarily have that technical of an understanding of how the banking system works. But it turns out my assumption about what was going on with their financial system was almost entirely wrong, because the problem is not just that they don't have enough money in the banks. It's about what kind of money they have in the banks. Because the problem in Lebanon is not that the banks don't have enough Lebanese currency, the Lebanese pound. They actually have plenty of Lebanese pounds. The problem is they don't have any U.S. dollars. And you would think, well, what do they need U.S. dollars for? That's the currency of the United States, not of Lebanon. Well, it turns out that Lebanon has, still does what is one of the most horrible and terrible ideas as far as monetary systems go. And they peg the value of the Lebanese pound to the dollar. Now, the idea of pegging your currency to the dollar is sort of a trick. It's a way of getting people to think that your currency has some constant exchange rate with the dollar. And so in 1997, they decided, okay, 1,500 Lebanese pounds equals $1. And they set this into law. So supposedly, you're supposed to be able to go to a bank and exchange 1,500 Lebanese pounds for $1. Now, the only reason why the price would be set there is not because 1,500 Lebanese pounds are worth $1. It's because that's just what the government said. The government said, okay, this is what you're going to trade it at. But in reality, if there was any kind of currency market, which there is, it's just it's unofficial. It's an underground currency market. 1,500 Lebanese pounds are worth nowhere near $1. If the government of Lebanon wanted 1,500 Lebanese pounds to equal $1, what they would have to do is, one, stop printing more Lebanese pounds so that you don't have this massive supply of Lebanese pounds and not enough dollars, because that's essentially where they're at right now. There are a bunch of Lebanese pounds chasing too few dollars, so the price of dollars relative to Lebanese pounds should rise, meaning that it should take more pounds, more than 1,500 pounds, to buy $1. And the government's not letting that happen. So what that means is that when people go to the bank to try and withdraw their dollars, the bank doesn't have them because there aren't enough dollars in the country to equal all of the to be relative to the amount of Lebanese pounds that there are. Because in order to have a system where you can smoothly exchange $1 for 1,500 Lebanese pounds, there shouldn't be more than 1,500 Lebanese pounds in circulation for every dollar in circulation. But in reality, there are far more than 1,500 Lebanese pounds in circulation for every dollar. And so everyone who has dollar deposits in the bank now can't get them out. There aren't enough dollars to pay everyone who is a depositor in the bank. The banks don't have the money. And so the way to solve this problem is to let the exchange rate rise, and in which case the Lebanese pound would become relatively cheap, and the dollar would become relatively expensive, meaning that it would attract dollars into Lebanon. And so suddenly people would try and would take their dollars and invest them in Lebanon because they're relatively scarce there. You can make a decent amount of money. Under this scenario, you would be able to make a decent amount of money investing dollars there. But as long as you have this artificial restriction on the exchange rate, you're not going to attract any more dollars there, because the price is the same as it ever was. So all you end up with then is a shortage. The market can't clear. And the sad part is, if things didn't have to be this way, like I said, if the Lebanese government wanted this system to work smoothly and they wanted, 1,500 pounds to equal $1, there's two things they could have done. The first thing, like I said earlier, don't print money. Don't print money so fast that the Lebanese pound is depreciating faster than the dollar, because the dollar is depreciating at a steady rate. Even if the Lebanese government, never printed any money, it would be worth relatively more than the dollar. But instead, the Lebanese pound and the dollar are both depreciating, but the pound has been depreciating at a faster rate since 1997 when it was pegged. So now the second issue, other than just not printing so many Lebanese pound, is if they made the Lebanese pound convertible on a, fully convertible through the central bank into dollars. In order to do so, they would need to hold a 100% dollar reserve for every 1,500 Lebanese pounds in circulation. So that means that if the central bank prints 1,500 Lebanese pounds and puts them out into the economy, that means that they have $1 in the central bank backing that up. That would put Lebanon on a true dollar standard. And if things were done that way, you would never get into a position like this, to where there's too many pounds and too few dollars for everything to clear. Because if you were disciplined and and held $1 in reserve every time you printed another 1,500 Lebanese pounds, then there would be, in reality, $1 for every 1,500 Lebanese pounds. And so the government has screwed their people over by, just as a side note, how many times, take a guess, that's kind of like guessing how many beans there are in a jar, how many times did I say 1,500 Lebanese pounds in this video? That'd make for a good contest. If I had thought of this ahead a little more, I should have come up with a prize. But anyway, Lebanon's in trouble. The government has screwed them out, has screwed their people over. The folks who have dollars in the bank probably will never be paid back. The banks are going to have to default. And it really is, partially, I'm sure if I looked into this, I could find ways to directly blame the banks. But this certainly would have never happened had the government not tried to lie and print, Lebanese pounds without taking in more dollars, and tried to abide by this fake, dishonest exchange rate. And so we're now at the point to where, they're in a currency crisis. This is the absolute worst thing that can happen to an economy. And for this reason alone, I would imagine that if I lived in Lebanon, I would support the overthrow of the establishment based on this alone, because this is the worst thing that you can do to a country. A strong and stable currency is the foundation of any reliable economy, of any economy in which anyone can hope to try and make a decent living. And they've taken that away from their people. So if you gain anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.